I'm Heather Fleming, founder of In Purpose Educational Services and author of the book, My Black Friend Says.
And I'm Delaney Ray, the coordinator of the LEAP Institute. So what do we do now, Heather?
Same thing we've always done, Delaney. Keep fighting for an equitable world.
This time in a podcast.
Welcome to the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, where comfortable friends chat about uncomfortable topics.
Let's do it. I haven't told you what we're talking about today.
No, you have not.
Okay. Yesterday, I was a racist. Blatant racist yesterday.
Wow. Tell me more.
I was, and I want to tell you the story, and then I want to tell you my immediate response, and then I want to tell you my secondary response, because I think it's very important to share. So, like you yourself and many people, I am a member of several different groups on Facebook where we all share some sort of common interest. And one of these groups I'm in, there's a woman in there, a young woman. She's probably, 10, 15 years younger than I am, that I've kind of gotten to know because she's pretty active in the group. And she is in Texas. She lives in Texas with her husband and her 5 little boys, and they're a Black family in Texas.
Okay.
And her beautiful little boys, all very close in age and all very young. I honestly cannot imagine how tired she is.
Right.
She and her husband are both very fit, and so she'll post pictures of them working out and all these things I should do, but I don't. But yesterday, for the first time, to my knowledge, she posted a picture of their house. She posted a picture of them all outside in front of their house.
Mm-hmm.
And Heather, when I tell you this house was a mansion, this house is a mansion. It was so beautiful. And I immediately was like, man, this young family with 5 little kids to feed and take care of, how do they afford this house? And my brain immediately said, is her husband a rapper that I've never heard of?
Oh, yeah.
And then I knew what I had done. Then I knew what my brain had done. The immediate shock of, wow, young Black man must be a rapper. My brain didn't say, I wonder if he's the top neurosurgeon in Texas. He could be the top neurosurgeon in Texas, but that's not where my brain went. So then my initial immediate response was shame and embarrassment and guilt that I went there. My brain went there, just instantly. And that shame and that guilt kicks in and wants to justify itself and deny what just happened. But this is where I think the conversation is so important, is from reading your book, My Black Friend Says, and from reading Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. I was able to pretty immediately then stop that shame and guilt and really break down why and where I had that racist thought, why and where I went so quickly to a thought that was so racially biased and stereotypical. And I was able to stop and think, well, gosh, this is what media has told me all of my life. This is what movies and TV shows have depicted all of my life. And that conversation and discussion we've had about why representation really does matter when we are all just stewing in social racism. I'm not even immune to it. All of the personal desires that I have to not be racist, I'm still racist.
Yeah. The whole time you've been speaking, I was sitting here nodding my head, because this is what precisely I talk to people about, is the fact that, we are raised and initiated into a society that is racist. And so we look at the ways even that that African American people are presented in the media, et cetera. And so that ends up being an initial thought, I think, for a lot of people is, something must have happened. They must be he must be a basketball player. He must be well, the other thing that we don't think about too is from the sexism perspective. What if it's her?
It's funny. It's funny you say that, because then I actually did have that same conversation with myself. I think I do happen to know that she doesn't work outside of the home.
Okay.
Because she has, had these little babies so back to back. But I did think about that too. Or what if she doesn't work outside of the home, but she's got generational wealth? What if she inherited a huge amount of money? The other part is none of my business.
Right. Well, that's something too. But it just is one of those things where, and I talk about this all the time in training, is we have to reject those shame responses. And so I'm really glad that you did, because the bigger thing is to recognize the racism within the thoughts. And we can't do that if we're responding to shame, if we're, initiating a shame response, because shame makes you feel like you have to defend who you are as a good person. And guilt lets you accept the fact that you can be a good person and still do bad things, or still do things that, aren't the best and require some correction. And so in that particular case, that's where we have to start training our thoughts. And you're right. That is where representation is absolutely essential, because of the fact that we need counter narratives to the narratives that we've been offered. And what we've been offered in our society is that if an African American person is successful, if they, have large homes, fancy cars, et cetera, it must be because, as you said, they're a rapper, they're a sports, they play some sports where they've made it to the big league. It can't be because we don't see enough examples. It can't be because they are neurosurgeons. It can't be because they are, lawyers, or just any of those really higher up. I have a cousin who is one of my favorite cousins, and he just purchased a home, and he was like, "Oh, I got a new house." And honey, I saw pictures of that house, and I was like, "Oh, you lied. You just got a new mansion. That is not a house." And same thing, lives in Texas, etc. And for a second, until you said 5 young boys, I was like, is that my cousin? But he is a CEO, human resources CEO at a airline. And so you get to the point where you're like, there are so many counter narratives, but we have to reject shame. Shame is the feeling of I did something wrong. I am wrong, or I am bad. Whereas guilt is the feeling of I did something wrong. And so shame makes it to where it's almost impossible to get past that initial place that we need to get past, which is the defensiveness, the denial, etc., into making sure that we are actually examining the behavior. And if you look at our society, too many people, their initial response is, I'm not racist, as opposed to saying, what in that behavior is something that I need to change. And until we get to the point where that is the first place, because the ultimate goal is for us to get to a point in our society where there are enough examples, there's enough representation, that the possibilities for African Americans and for other minorities are just as big as they are for white Americans, okay? That's our ultimate goal. But until we reach that ultimate goal, then the next place that we need to get to is to where when we do have these racist thoughts, we accept the fact that this could possibly happen. And instead of it being I have to defend myself, I have to prove that I'm not racist, I have to prove, A, B, C, and especially I have to prove that I'm a good person, that instead it is about what in my behavior do I need to change so that I can be as fair to this group of people as I am to that group of people. And so we have ways that our biases are instilled within us, and they're instilled by, the experiences that we have, but also, and people don't think about that, the experiences that we don't have.
Correct.
The examples that we have, but also the examples that we don't have.
And that is the biggest piece that's missing when my brain immediately jumps to Black man, young Black man, lots of money, rapper. Like it was this seamless jump when there were so many other steps in there that my brain crossed over. And I like the way you said, until it's something that I am being able to be immersed in seeing equality across the board, I need to be consciously more aware of my thought processes and how I got to that point. Because like I said, my immediate response was shame. And I didn't just do that, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other part that was important for me about sharing this story for anyone that happens to be listening is I also at no point, even when I thought he might, be somebody, famous, these weren't negative thoughts. It's not like I thought ill of this family. It wasn't that I was thinking anything bad or negative about this family, but it was still racist. Racism doesn't have to come out as meanness or, I again, in this idea that it's not that I'm a bad person, but I still have racist tendencies because it is an ongoing, every day rooting out these ideas and biases that I've just been stewed in them. I've just been cooked in them my whole life.
Yeah. And, it's something that you just brought up a really great point. Some of these racist thoughts don't have to be negative. Like, for instance, I was an educator before I began doing this work. And it's just as racist for me as an educator to look at my, Japanese student and assume that kid will not have any academic struggles because, oh, look, they're Asian. You know how Asian families are so on top of this and blah, blah, blah. It's just as racist.
Even though it's a positive attribute.
Even though it's a positive attribute, it's just as racist for me to not see the wants and needs of my student from Japan because I made a positive assumption, because in the end, now here's a student that's still not getting what they need from an academic standpoint because I choose to see them according to a stereotype as opposed to who they really are and what they need. And so the racist thoughts don't even always have to be negative. And one of the things that I stress to people too is that when we have racist thoughts like this that are a result of our biases, one of the things that we have to remember is that we can be biased despite what our stated and conscious beliefs are. So I could be like, I have an example for you. Someone contacted me about being part of our craft fair, and I misgendered that person. I made an assumption, and so I looked and I said, and I was inviting them in. I said, well, it's a little past the deadline, but you seem like a nice lady, so I'll let you in. And that person was just kind enough to take the time to say, it looks like, and this is why it's also really important to make sure that we state our beliefs out loud so that people feel comfortable sharing. And in that sharing allows us the opportunity for correcting ourselves. And so that individual contacted me and said, you look like you're really trans friendly. And so I will let you know that I consider myself binary, non-binary. And I was like, oh, I said, well, then I apologize and let me redo my original statement. You seem like a nice person. I said, I should have said that to begin with. They were just so gracious about it that we had a great conversation that ensued. And so even though my stated belief is that I am trans friendly, I am open to people of all, queer and LGBTQ plus experiences, I still make mistakes and missteps. And so if I were responding with shame, then my first impulse would have been to be like, Well, you know what I meant, and to be very, very defensive, but because of the fact that I instead tapped into the guilt part, I was able to accept the fact that, you know what, I made a mistake. Here's how I'm going to correct that mistake. And then from this point forward, here's what I will do. And that ends up, you talked about reading my book. In my book, I have a whole chapter about the proper apology. And that ends up being the 3 steps of the proper apology. I apologize. I'm acknowledging that what I did was wrong and that I understand how it was wrong. And then here's how I'm changing for the future. And I'm going to implement some real change. And so I'm not just thinking about when I deal with that person, I'm thinking about how I will respond in the future. And so here was an occasion where something that I have stated as a belief, which is a belief of mine, that I made a mistake because of my bias. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that mistake, here's how I corrected. And so I think that, in you sharing your story and in me sharing my stories and in all of us continuing to share our stories, what we end up doing is teaching each other just in general how to be better and how to love people the way that they need to be loved. And for my trans and LGBTQ and queer friends and family and loved ones and, supporters out there, I still remain very, very supportive, even when I make a mistake, because I realize that I still have biases that I need to work through. And until we get to a point where some of this stuff becomes so normalized and so part of our lives, we are going to continue to make a mistake. And so, yes, with in your example, this shows why representation is so very, very important.
I wanted to share this story because I think the other thing we need to do, again, that you bring up in your book, My Best Friend Says, and that Ibram X. Kendi brings up in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is we need to break the stigma of seeing racist as something that only really bad people intentionally do.
We do. We absolutely
do. We need to start to recognize within ourselves when and how and where we are racist and face it with the love and the compassion of being the good people that we want to be, as opposed to the denial and the shame and the, all of the negative things we talked about earlier that can jumpstart. I'm not racist. I didn't mean that.
Yeah. According to Dr. Michael Brazel, there are when we look at diversity conflict, and diversity conflict is based upon oppression, there's 4 different types of oppression that we look at. And so what I'm trying to tell people is that, the good and bad binary only works for the intentional types of racism. And so there's 2 intentional types of racism. One is the blatant type, okay? So that is the one that, is like the Holocaust or, just the most egregious types, KKK and some of these organizations, white supremacist organizations. Yes, that is bad. That is bad because you're intending to cause harm to other groups. And then the second type ends up being the covert or the hidden oppression. And that type of oppression is where, even though it is intentional, it's covert. And it's covert because of society and how society pressures you, et cetera. And so, okay, well, I can't be blatant about the fact that I don't give home loans to Black people easily. So what I'll do is I'll hide behind rules and regulations, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. That is still bad. That's bad. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The problem is that, and I tell people all the time, most of the racism that I will experience will not be from bad people that are intending to do it. And that's where we have to move away from the good and bad binary, because what happens is that then when you try to address those 2 types, that unintentional, those 2 types of racism, there are people that as soon as you say racism, they think of these other two types, which are definitely bad. And they're trying to defend themselves against being seen as a bad person. But,
Correct.
when we have reasonable oppression is where you have people that it's parts of our society where it's been racist all along the way. And we've just grown accustomed to it. And it's stuff like, naming schools after Confederate generals and having African Americans attempt to achieve success in this school named after a Confederate general who fought to keep our people enslaved. It is, continuing to have vestiges of an old system that was created to be racist. When we look at many aspects of our criminal justice system, it was created to produce inequity. When we look at even our educational system, to have an entire staff, a school that the entire staff is white. So all of the teachers, all the administrators, everyone that's making decisions in that school and educating the students is white. That's reasonable oppression. No one sees a problem with that, but it's problematic. It's racist. So but it's not because people are intending to be racist. There could be a lot of factors in there, but we still need to fix it. And then the last type, of course, is the unconscious oppression, where people do stuff and don't even realize that it's racist because they have unexamined bias. And so they commit microaggressions that they may not even be aware are microaggressions, or they may not even be aware that it's racist. And again, it's still good people. They're just doing a bad thing, but they're doing a bad thing partially because we have been brought up into a society that is okay with it. It's fine with it,
And we have to face it. We have to face the fact that racism is there and it's prevalent and it's just everywhere in order to give ourselves permission to seek out our biases, in order to make them examined as opposed to, unexamined, which is, I'm hoping, where I got to yesterday with my internal journey.
You did. And then you made an even further stand by saying, you know what, I want to share this because that's the next thing we have to do. I tell parents, and when I'm talking to parents about, how to raise anti-racists, part of their job is to be transparent with their children, because your kids can't see your behaviors, and they're paying attention to that. They're paying attention to everything that you do. So they can't see some of these behaviors and then not see you going through the process of examining those behaviors. So they need the example of you doing good stuff, but then they also need the example of what you do when you do something that's not so good. And so, I appreciate you really sharing it. I shared my experience because in the end, hey, I've done a lot of research. I do this work. I talk to people all the time, and I still make mistakes. And so for people whose job, this is literally my job, day to day, I'm immersed in this work. So how do we expect people who aren't immersed in this work, but are trying to not make mistakes? And so I tell people a lot that really the work of anti-racism is in the trying. It's not in the perfection. You're not, as long as you're trying to be an anti-racist, as long as you are trying to be an LGBTQ advocate, as long as you are trying to be, an advocate for people of different religions and other experiences, you're going to mess up. And in that messing up is what you do in the next steps that become the most important. And so I think you demonstrated like what it is that we need to do. We need to take a minute, pause, really realize, oh, wow, this is where my mind went. How do I fix that? Start coming up with some different mental models, and then also be willing to share that to help others to become better as well. And if it's a situation where you can apologize. Like, in my situation, I was having direct conversation with her so I can apologize. Excuse me. Them. See, I made the mistake there again. Them, I can apologize and say, hey, yeah, I messed up. I am so sorry. Let me go back and rewind so I can try to, do a little do-over. And then after the do-over, here's what I'm going to do next. And it's in the next. So since then, in conversations with them, I feel like I've gotten it right. This work is all about trying and doing and learning and correcting, and reflecting and analyzing. You have to be able to do all of that openly. It requires a certain amount of maturity and emotional maturity as well as social skill that some people don't have. And we, it's a shame, but it's something that needs to be developed. There are characteristics that come with being anti-racist. Is one of them is an immeasurable well of appreciation for others, regardless of their background, a deep amount of empathy. You have to have empathy, but then also the ability to reflect. And some people don't have that emotional ability to be able to reflect so that they can do better for next time, because that's the ultimate goal.
Well, and I think that's why I asked you to allow me to tell you my story today, is that fortunately for the people involved, my racism was internal thoughts. So I could have pretended it never happened. But I think it's good for people to hear me working with you, doing this work, doing this podcast, being involved in this anti-racism, being able to say, wow, I am racist.
Yeah. Here's the problem. We're thinking about, and that ends up being the ultimate level of anti-racism that we want to get people to. There are lots of people that do really, really well if you say, hey, did you think about how this was, maybe a little racist? They do well on that, okay? You have other people that, even though they state that they're trying to do this work, whenever you tell them, hey, this behavior that you just displayed was, hurtful, that they don't do well with that. And so we work with those people on the inside, as far as our work is concerned. But in the end, where we're ultimately trying to get people to is to have those internal conversations, even if they're not out loud. Do you see what I'm saying? That's where the change happens. You're right. You could have gone on with your day and never made a second thought about that, but you chose to do some internal work, even when there was no one there to correct you, to judge you, to say, oh, you really need to do that.
Well, I can give you one guarantee, and that is that I will mess up again.
Yeah.
Whether it's internal or external, I am still a work in progress.
All of us should.
So thankful to know how and where now to seek out the right information and better information to replace faulty thoughts and biases that have been allowed to grow inside of me.
Yep. So, that's what all of us need to do. Need to be able to do that internal correction and to just keep going, because that's the other part, How many times have we been in groups where people are like, well, this is the reason why I don't do A, B, and C. Well, if one kink is going to make you quit, how dedicated were you really, how deep and firm in your beliefs were you really to begin with?
So it's interesting you say that, because in those initial moments when I caught myself and called myself out on what had just happened, and I'm talking in a matter of just seconds, all of these thoughts, and again, it goes back to that shame. Not only did I have the desire to pretend I hadn't had that thought or to justify it, but then I also had in the same moment this thought of, I can't do this work. I'm a mess. I'm a mess. I'm a racist. I can't do this work. But that's important not to just, well, I give up then, because that doesn't help. That wouldn't help anybody. It wouldn't help me. It wouldn't help you. It wouldn't help anybody listening to us or learning from us. It just, nobody would be helped by me throwing in the towel and just saying, well, I'm done.
And the irony in that moment of that being your initial thought is that even having that moment is proof that you should be doing this work. Thanks for listening to this episode. You can support us on Patreon by looking for the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES. That is INPurposeES. You can also follow us on Twitter at InPurposeEA, or visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com.
Heather, this was great. Do you want to do it again next week?
I sure do, Delaney.
Awesome. Talk to you then.
Bye.